Hi, everyone. My name's Mackenzie. I work with the Technovation team, and this is for the Solve It Team series. Firstly, wherever you are in the world, we at Technovation want you to know we're thinking about you, and we hope that our videos can bring you some fun and some learning in your day. I have with me Mike from ideas42. He's an expert in nonprofit design. It's a firm that uses cutting-edge research to understand patterns in how humans behave in order to create real solutions that drive lasting social change. Thanks, Mike, for being here with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe a little more about what ideas42 is?
Sure, I'd love to. The organization I work for, ideas42, as you said, we're a nonprofit. And we use science about human decision and behavior to design and enhance products, programs, and systems that improve the world. And so we do this work with a wide range of partners, ranging from governments to foundations, private companies, public institutions, nonprofits in over 40 countries around the world. On projects ranging from getting people to conserve water in Costa Rica to getting more people to get the flu vaccine here in the United States. Most of the work I do is around helping companies develop or enhance products that can help people improve their financial health.
Really cool, and also pretty similar to some of the stuff that our participants create. Sounds like you're solving some similar issues around maybe health or conservation, things like that. So today we're going to be focusing a little bit on how to build tech that people want and that people need.
That is the $1,000,000 question. Before we dive in, there's a lot I could say about that. I thought we could play a quick little game. So I'm going to just ask you to fill in the blank. So I'm going to say something, and I'm going to leave a blank, and you have to fill it in. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Great. All right. So when I say something's funny, it's called a
joke.
If you don't have any money, you are
broke.
The white part of an egg is called a
yolk.
So it's not called a yolk. The yellow part of the egg is called a yolk.
You got me.
I got you. It's all good. Everyone tends to fall for that. And the reason that you fell for it is that you were acting in a really automatic way. I was kind of pushing you along and asking you to think quickly. It turns out that when we're on autopilot like this, we do things often without really thinking about them really deeply. And as it turns out, we're in this autopilot mode like very often. And the reason is because of how our brains are wired. If we can kind of represent our brains using characters from The Simpsons, we've got kind of two systems. System one is fast, automatic, intuitive. That's kind of the Homer part of the brain. It reacts really quickly. It doesn't think too deeply. And then there's a system two that is more the Lisa Simpson part of the brain. It's slower, more analytical, more rational, thinks more slowly. We tend to think that a lot of what we do is based on deliberative reasoning and stopping to really consider our options and really make informed choices. But a lot of the time, we're actually using system one and acting really, really quickly, like you just did a minute ago. And I want to point out that even though Homer tends to be kind of this goofball character who's, a bit of a dummy sometimes, system one is actually really, really important and incredibly helpful in helping us navigate a world that's really, really complicated. So, for example, if we were to perceive a threat, or prehistoric people, if they were to perceive a threat, we wanted to be able to react really, really quickly. So if you saw a lion or a tiger, it wouldn't be useful to stop and think, is this a danger? What is this lion or tiger doing here? It would be helpful to just react quickly and get out of there. If we instead stopped to evaluate and deeply analyze every decision we made, we would have been eaten thousands of years ago. And so why am I telling you all of this? Why is this relevant when thinking about building and using and helping people use an app or technology? Is that creating something that people want and need is only part of the battle. We also want to make sure that we create something that people use. And in order to do that, it could be really helpful to understand in a deep way how people think and how people make decisions.
So that's to help them to use that first part, that first quick reaction, the automatic reaction, versus having a user have to deliberate on, even simple steps for starting off to use or download an app. It should be pretty quick. It should be kind of natural to them almost.
Yeah, when things require a lot of effort, it can be tough to stick with them, at least for a long time, especially if that's happening at a time when someone's rushed or you actually don't have a lot of time and attention. So the easier we can make something to use, the more we could make it easy to understand, the more likely we are to get people to use it.
Gotcha. And we had some questions actually come in from some of our participants around the world. So one is kind of, after you decide on your issue, how do you begin or start working on that design or thinking about that problem, the way you should be approaching it?
So when you're thinking about making an impact on the world with the technology that you're developing, we could really break that up into 3 different steps. So first, there's the adoption step. So we want to get people to download the app. Then we want people to use the app in the way that we intend them to use it. And then if we want them to do something based on that in the real world, we want them to follow through and actually take that action. And so you can imagine different types of barriers that would inhibit people from doing that at each step. So for example, in the first step around adoption, maybe you are creating something that people want and need, but maybe they just aren't aware of it. But you'll probably have the most control over that middle phase, how people use the app, because all those decisions are kind of up to you and how you design the app. So people might want and need your app, but if they can't use it, you're stuck.
Right.
So I'll use an example. Like, we can all agree that we need and want doors in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Doors are important. But if we do a bad job of designing those doors, people won't use them in the right way. So, for example, the image on this slide shows a woman struggling to get a door open. And in this case, she's failing to do so because the design of the door signifies that she's supposed to be pulling it, when in reality, the door needs to be pushed.
A classic problem.
Classic problems. And this is a really good metaphor for bad design. You want good design to be intuitive.
Right.
A much better design in this case would be to remove the pull bar, replace it with a flat push panel. That would make it impossible for someone to pull it. It would make it so pushing is the only option. So when you look at the world with a focus on usability, I think the most important tip I could give, and this applies much more broadly, I think this is a really good life tip as well, is to test your assumptions. Mm-hmm. So we make dozens of assumptions every day without even realizing it. So we might assume that someone who didn't return our phone call is mad at us or doesn't like us anymore, or that something will take us 30 minutes to do when it ends up taking us 2 hours to do. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the times we do make correct assumptions, but a lot of the times it's actually really costly for us to make bad assumptions, to operate with bad assumptions. And so, for example, you wouldn't want to make some assumption about some sort of need that your users have, and then spend months developing an app, do all the coding, do all the design, only to later find out that people don't actually have that need.
Yeah, that would be a disaster. All that hard work.
Yeah, this is kind of one of the most fundamental parts of design and product design, is figuring out, one, how to identify those assumptions. So that can be really challenging. So it's important to really challenge yourself to understand, what are the things that I'm assuming to be true? What are the things that, if they were not true, would change the way that I approach this problem? So, one way that companies sometimes do this is, before even developing a product, a company might put an ad up on Facebook describing the product to see if people click on it. When people click on it, it takes them to a website saying, hey, like in development, like come back at so-and-so date, or put them on some sort of a wait list to get the product or the service. But through that process, people have a really good sense of, hey, is the way that I'm presenting this, is that useful? Is that interesting to people? Do people respond well to that? And tests don't need to be really analytical. It could just be talking to someone, showing them some sketches of your some wireframes of your app, and then having them kind of with their finger just point out what they would click on.
Right.
And through that process, you begin to do some usability testing to see how people actually interact with your app.
Yeah, and it's important to know, I think, especially for our participants, that there are a lot of different iterations or versions of the app that you might end up creating. And a lot of that probably does have to do with testing these assumptions and learning more about what people actually do want and need.
Yeah, and don't put pressure on yourself to get it right the first time, right? Like you want to do this to learn. And that first step can be the hardest, but it's also just taking it as the most important. No one ever gets it right on the first try. All the best products in the world that we rely on and use every day went through dozens, if not hundreds of iterations before they got to the state that they're in now.
Yeah, that's really important, I think, for our girls and families to know.
So another tip that I could mention relates to this, and that's the fact that you're not your users. You know, even if you're designing something for your friends and family, we all still have different goals and different preferences, and perhaps most importantly, a different level of understanding about the thing that you're developing. So you're going to be the expert in the app or the technology that you're creating. And so one assumption that you might find yourself making without realizing at this point is that everyone else knows the same things you know, which most of the time won't be true. So this is another reason why testing is really important. Another very tactical tip is that you shouldn't expect people to read your instructions. So we all have limited attention, and that means we tend to notice things that stand out, not necessarily the things that are important. So if your app requires someone to read 2 paragraphs of instructions, you could pretty reasonably expect that they won't read it. So it's really important that you're not overloading your users with written text, and that anything really important is standing out so that when people are scanning, they see it. So you might want to ask yourself, you know, if people only had 5 seconds to read this screen or read this page, what would they do? And that doesn't have to be a hypothetical question. You could design a test where you remove all the instructions or only leave 10% of the instructions and see what people do, see how people kind of intuitively respond to your product.
Right. And that could probably be helpful, even simple instructions. Like I'm thinking just when I first download an app and maybe I have to register, write in like, what's my name? What's my email? What's maybe my date of birth? And then if the app doesn't prompt me kind of quickly and easily, I might just give up on filling something like that out. It's almost like filling out a really long survey. Sometimes people just don't even do it.
Yeah, that's a great segue to my next tip. And this isn't really a tip, but just a really important point to make. And that's that really small obstacles can throw us off course. So sometimes we could really want to do something, but these little small hassles, they can add up. Think about one, kind of what we talked about, like how much new learning is required for people to use your app. How intuitive can you make it? Is it possible for you to reduce the number of steps? Can you make the important stuff really easy to find? And also, you know, do people know kind of where they are in the process, and how many steps remain and what they're working towards? Because if people kind of find themselves in this poorly defined process where they don't really know what the end goal is, they don't know how many steps they have left, it could be that much harder to finish.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was actually looking at an online sort of education program to learn how to play guitar these past couple of weeks while we're all sort of stuck in our houses and trying to pick up some new hobbies. And their app is pretty cool in that they give you a couple different tracks for how to start as a beginner and then where you will end up. So now I have an idea of what I might be able to play after a couple weeks of working through this, and also kind of getting little wins along the way to get myself there.
For sure.
Pretty well aware of this process that I'm going through.
Yeah. You want to not only show people what the end goal is, but you want to make sure that you're creating that sense of progress.
And that probably would keep people using your app, right? Because they're seeing how it's benefiting them.
For sure. I'll share one last tip. I know we're short on time, but and then this is about this one's tough to execute, but it's really important. And this is around making the right choice the easy one. So over the course of the day, we're confronted with hundreds, if not thousands, of little choices that we have to make. And most of the time, we tend to kind of follow the path of least resistance. We tend to think that lots of choices are really good, but in reality, lots of choices makes it that much harder for us to choose the right thing, and it makes us less satisfied with the choice that we eventually make. And so if you're presenting people with 5 choices, ask yourself, can I cut that down to 2 or 3? Can I help people make the right choice by telling them or showing them the choice that other people have made? So when we don't know what to do in a given situation, we tend to look to cues from other people to help us decide what to do.
All right. Well, that was a bunch of great tips. I think there's a lot that our participants can learn, here about how to approach first the app and design, understanding their users, and then tweaking things along the way. And some important lessons also just about continuing to work and iterate and make changes when you get feedback from users, understanding how to simplify things for them so they can really just pick up your app, download it, and start using it right away. So I do have another question. I know a lot of our participants, they use a lot of different features. A lot of them are learning maybe to code for the first time and are really interested in building features into their apps and their product. And I want to talk about if more features are actually better.
That's a really good question. I think a lot of us tend to go there when thinking about creating a new product or an app. It's like, hey, what are all the cool features that I could build, or how can I make this product look really cool? And it's really hard to create something that is able to fulfill a bunch of different needs for people.
Right?
It's much better to start with one need. What is the one thing that you want your app to accomplish? What is that? What is the value that it's creating for people? Can you articulate that in 1 or 2 sentences? And if not, go back to the drawing board and try to workshop it. See if you could kind of explain the reason behind your app, what problem you want it to solve in a really, really simple way. If you can't do that, it probably means that your users are going to have a hard time understanding it as well, or they'll just have lots of very different ideas about the need that it solves. And so over time, potentially you might want to introduce more features. But to start, I would suggest find that one thing that you're going to do really well and do a really good job at that.
Right. That's a great tip. Thank you so much for being here, for jumping on and giving some of your insight from the work that you guys do at ideas42.
My pleasure. I am super impressed with, not knowing them personally, but already just the fact that students and their families are kind of embarking on this journey to take the leap to tackle problems in their town or in their community. It is way cooler than the things that I was doing as a middle schooler. And so I have so much respect for everyone that's setting out on this journey.